Okay, so just so we're respectful of everybody's time, we're just going to go ahead and get started. Welcome back, or welcome for those of you that are just now joining us. If you don't know me, my name is Holly Mays, and I work for the Department of Associated Students as the Assistant Director of Governmental Affairs. And we welcome you today. And next, I want to pass off the introductions to your Internal Vice President, B. Schaefer.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I just have a quick statement to read before we get started. I want to say on behalf of the AS President, EVPLA, and the Student Advocate General, and myself, I would like to welcome you to this training session. The following curriculum supports our vision for the 2021-2022 academic year and the knowledge we find essential for the association as we start fall quarter. Please note that these training sessions are only a portion of the information you will be required to learn as per legal code. Please take this time to be an active participant and engage with your fellow peers. We look forward to serving you all, and I wanted to introduce, without further ado, our facilitators, which will be Marvia, Sophia, and Jay. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. We are going to be presenting our Reframing Disability workshop right now. So I'm just going to wait for the other two hosts to get on video, and then we can start.
Okay, so hello everyone. Thank you for taking some time out of your day to attend our Reframing Disability workshop. As Jay said, we are the Associated Students Commission on Disability Equality, or CODE. As a reminder, don't forget to turn on the live transcription feature near the chat icon as needed. So here on the screen, we've included CODE's logo. It's a white outline of a wheelchair user with a blue gradient circle. To the left, we have the acronym CODE, and beneath that, we have the words Commission on Disability Equality in lowercase letters, but in small print. And then we've also included the neurodiversity symbol, which is a rainbow-colored infinity sign. This represents and celebrates the infinite range of natural variation in human neurocognitive functioning. We are honored to have the privilege today to share thoughts specifically regarding disability inclusion, justice, appreciation, and have we recognized or indirectly or directly interact with ableism. So hello, nice to meet you. My name is Sophia Lee Park. My pronouns are she, her. I am the current External Affairs Coordinator of CODE. I'm an Asian American woman with dark brown hair, wearing a gray UCSB shirt today. In the picture here, we see that I'm wearing a dark blue jacket. And currently I'm a junior pursuing a BA in sociology with either a minor in education studies or disability studies. I've been an active CODE officer for the entirety of my time here at UCSB, and initially got involved with CODE because of the campus infrastructure accessibility issues I noticed on campus, as well as my desire to work with and for other students who also hope to create a student-centered space that celebrates and commemorates disability justice, history, and culture, both on our campus, but in higher education. Now I will let my fellow officers introduce themselves.
Hello, everyone. As Sophia mentioned, we are from CODE, and you can learn more about our commission by visiting our website at code.as.ucsb.edu. My name is Marvia Cunanan, and my pronouns are she, they. On the screen is a picture of me. I'm a Filipino-American femme-presenting person with long black hair pulled back into 2 hair clips. And in the picture, I'm wearing a blouse with a grid pattern, and the background is this green naturey blur. Today, I'm wearing a tie-dye shirt and yellow hair clips. I'm a third-year student majoring in sociology and Asian American studies and minoring in feminist studies. I am the internal affairs chair of Code, and I joined Code because when I was going through my own process of getting late diagnosed and recognized for my own neurodivergence, I realized how valuable it would be to be able to build a community that can support each other as we navigate the barriers of an ableist world.
Thank you, Marvia. And hello, I'm Code's Gender and Sexuality Equity Outreach Coordinator. My name is Jay Sridhar, and I use he, he, they pronouns. I'm a third year majoring in statistics and data science with a possible minor in feminist studies. I'm a South Indian Tamil person with black hair, and both in the picture and today, I'm wearing a white shirt. I joined Code after Marvia reached out to me earlier this year. Soon after I myself was diagnosed with a disability and neurodivergence. That's what made me realize just how lacking some of our support systems are at UCSB and what we can do to fix them.
Okay, back to me again. So before we begin, I would like to evoke a more welcoming environment, and that is to provide an important disclaimer statement, which is this, right? When we talk about disability inclusion, as well as justice in this workshop, this does not provide all the answers for anti-ableism or is not a formal how-to guide to better support students of all abilities. It is important to note that the content and the structure of this workshop are primarily from our personal lived experiences as individuals in the disability community. Hence, while we do have some recommendations here, we are only a few students, therefore we do not claim to represent all students with disabilities or access needs. Every individual has unique stories, suggestions, and experiences. With this all being said, all students' voices, regardless of their ability, should and must be considered. We hope that this workshop can inspire you to start thinking critically about disability and accessibility more broadly, so that together, especially this coming year, we can make our campus and higher education in general more accessible and inclusive for everyone.
All right, and then I'll tell us our objective for today, which is to give students the language and resources to recognize ableism and to ensure that all social and academic spaces are inclusive for students of all abilities. And although there is not one singular disabled student experience, many members of the disability community may experience ableism. This takes many different forms depending on the kind of disability they have, the popular or public perception of their disability, and the intersections of other marginalizations with their disability. We will go into depth during the presentation on what these forms of ableism might look like. And with that, we can move on to the agenda. So here's our agenda for today. Part 1 is going to be focused on disability inclusion. We'll start with a large group discussion question, then move into breakout rooms to discuss the social model of disability and how it reframes our understanding of disability justice in the context of other social movements to uplift marginalized people. Following that, we'll have an introduction to some important terms and what disability inclusion means for associated students in particular. During part 2, we'll discuss the concept of nothing about us without us and disability demands justice, and what those things mean in terms of disability representation and anti-ableist work. Then we'll have another large group discussion question with breakout rooms, and this time the topic will be on universal design and the real-life material applications of inclusivity and anti-ableism. Finally, for our conclusion, we'll have one last group discussion question, then we'll share a takeaway handout with you and watch a closing video, followed by some reflection questions and open Q&A time. So without further ado, let's get started.
Thank you, Jay, for outlining our agenda. So now let's jump in. The first part of this presentation is about disability inclusion. We ask that y'all make as much of the most of this learning opportunity and participate as much as you're able. We'll be asking for your active engagement and participation by using the chat and the raise hand feature during the discussion portions of our workshop. So we'll get it started with your first opportunity for engagement is this discussion here. What is a disability? We use this question to show how there can be different understandings of disability, and we want to acknowledge that there's many possible answers to this question. So please share anything that comes to mind in the chat or use the raise hand feature and I can call on you. So the question on the screen is, what is a disability? And this is your opportunity to share your answers. Thank you, Hannah, for bravely putting in the chat that anything that can hinder someone's learning experience counts as a disability. Something not mainstream of society's abilities is another something that someone put in the chat. Something that physically or mentally limits a person's abilities. Okay. Okay, well, thank you and something that physically or mentally challenges people. Okay, now that we've got some ideas of what is a disability, we'll move on to chronic physical or mental disadvantages in a number of areas of life is another thing someone shared. Okay, we'll move on to the next portion of this where we'll be talking about another way to look at disability.
Okay, so we will watch this short clip from Dr. Jacques Den Houting, who is one of the many disability advocates calling for a paradigm shift surrounding the way we view disability. So this clip is from their TED Talk, Why Everything You Know About Autism is Wrong. So Marvia, we can go ahead and play that.
It's called the social model of disability. In the social model, disability happens when a person's environment doesn't cater for their individual characteristics. In the social model, we don't refer to people with a disability. Disability isn't something that I carry around like luggage. Instead, we use the word disabled as a verb. Disability is something that's being done to me. I'm actively being disabled by the society around me. When I go to a
All right, so we're going to pause there. And can someone volunteer to give us a recap of what they just said? You can put it in the chat or raise your hand. Environment doesn't cater to people's disability. And then I'll take one more comment. Yeah, the idea that being disabled is an effect of how society doesn't cater to people in general, and it's the world we live in that doesn't cater to the possible disabilities of others. Yeah, that's correct. So not everybody is going to use the term disabled, and there isn't like one way to refer to people with a disability or disabled people. But when we say person with a disability, we're putting the person part first and the disability part second. This is called person first language, which is self-explanatory. In certain situations, that's a great way to phrase things. You're emphasizing the humanity of people with disabilities, and it can be used to discuss the marginalizations that come with a specific type of disability. But this phrasing implies that people can have disabilities, that, it implies that we would be normal if not for some objective, clear-cut condition that qualifies as a disability. The social model of disability takes away the implication of an objective condition here, and in fact argues that disability is socially constructed. So we hear the phrase socially constructed a lot. So can somebody summarize what it means in the chat? Yeah, so someone said something man-made or conventionally accepted with real-life consequences. It's true. It's a really good summarization. So socially constructed means that we came up with the concept as a society. It doesn't necessarily exist outside of our society, and it's something that can be deconstructed if we examine it critically. Socially constructed doesn't mean that something isn't real. For example, money is a social construct. It's something we came up with as a society that doesn't really exist outside of it, but it's certainly a real thing that is weaponized to oppress people. And in the same way, disability is socially constructed. People with different access needs have those needs weaponized and withheld by certain people who are known as abled because the system they have built effectively provides them with the ability to restrict access needs for others. And therefore, disabled people become marginalized and oppressed under our social, economic, and political system. So that's why we as an organization refer to disabled people as just that, disabled by a system that is designed to restrict and oppress rather than care for them. In a world where all of our access needs were met to the fullest extent possible, we would not be disabled in the same sense, if at all. So with that, we'll move on to another discussion.
It's called.
So now that we've had that overview of what the social model of disability is, we're really trying to get y'all to start thinking about in what ways a social model of disability might change some of the ways we were talking about disability earlier. Earlier, we were talking about how it can often mean disadvantages and challenges or ways or things that can limit a person's ability, but a social model of disability might change things. So in this section of the presentation, we're going to give 10 minutes for a breakout room session where I'm going to send everybody out into breakout rooms and we'll discuss these 3 questions. The first question is, what were your first interactions with disability? And this could be euphemisms or your personal experience. If you have personal experience, we'd want you to start discussing how that might have changed over time. And the second question is, in what context have you heard or seen the term disability used and portrayed in the past and present? And finally, the third question is, when and where have you learned about disability history or culture? If you have not been taught this, why do you think that is? So I'm going to send everyone into breakout rooms now where let's have around 3 to 4 participants per room. We're going to recreate these and I'm going to open all of the rooms. So I believe everyone should, yeah, and I'll be posting the questions in the chat once everyone's joined the breakout rooms. Thank you. Okay, so it looks like everybody is back here now, and I hope you all had some interesting discussions in your breakout rooms. So now before we move on, I'm hoping to get some volunteers to raise their hand and share what they discussed in their breakout room. We can go through the questions in order, or if you just want to raise your hand and share what you discussed, that would be great.
Yeah, so oh, sorry, I didn't know we were raising hands.
Go ahead.
Okay, so just one thing I want to talk about was when our group talked about number 3, when and where have you learned about disability, history, or culture? I've never learned anything, about disabilities in school. I think it's one of those things where, the school system has kind of segregated a lot of, uh, you know, the kids with disabilities are in different classes, and you never really get to see anything about um, kids with disabilities. And I'm saying, I have my camera off, but I'm saying this with air quotes. It's one of those things where I, in my high school experience, was an ASB, and I went to those classes. I actually started up a program where our football team, it was called the Special Buddies program, where I pretty much had the football team go meet with the classrooms with students that had disabilities, and we met with them and got to interact with them one-on-one. And a lot of them, were quote unquote normal people, and it's one of those things where I don't think that schools do a good enough job integrating students with disabilities into the rest of the school. So I think that that's why I haven't learned anything about the history of culture, and why I think a lot of people haven't.
I
Thank you for
think that's
sharing.
really good, really thoughtful comment, and that was something that I actually talked with somebody else about. So um, we have a best buddies. I was just gonna tell you here in Santa Barbara. So contact me if you're interested. Thank you.
Definitely will. Thank you. Do you have any contact info in the chat yet?
We'll be sharing that at the end of our presentation, and thank you for your interest in that. B, it looks like you had a comment you wanted to share.
Yes, I did see that Jesse's hand was raised, so I could just go last, if that's okay. Jesse, did you still want to speak? Their hand's not raised. I was just going to share with my group. I think we had a good discussion. I feel like with the 2 other people that were in my group, a lot of the stuff they were saying in response to the questions was stuff that I've also experienced. And one of the good points is that I guess we'll go for each question. I said that my first interaction was with my family, and my other group members were saying similar things, like with their family or through school. And then in what context have we heard about it in past and present? That one was kind of a tough one to answer, because we were trying to figure out, like, is it like in conversation or historically? And so I was talking about like the history of ADA compliance and like how that's helped the community, but also like the how accessibility is becoming more of a conversation just universally or like globally. And then one member brought up how in elementary school, students that had disabilities would be called handicapped, and like that was more so like kind of like what Nate was talking about previously, is that they were separated and like you didn't really interact. And then all you would hear about is that certain students would need like accommodations. You wouldn't hear anything else about like the needs of the community or who they are as a person. It would just be focused on their disability. I'm kind of adding that portion. And then for the third one, when and where have you learned about disability history and or culture? If you have not been taught this, why do you think that is? We kind of all agreed that we didn't really learn about it, and that it's not taught, and that we're curious to learn more about it, because we realized that that's something that we haven't really learned. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you for sharing everything that your breakout room talked about. And I think it's really interesting how a lot of us are recognizing that there is this kind of separation that's happening. And when we talk about ADA compliance, there was a whole movement that and protests that happened to make sure that Section 504 of that was passed, so that there would be less discrimination, but like that's not usually talked about in schools in the way that it needs to be. And was there anyone else that wanted to share what their breakout room discussed before we move on?
Thank you, anyone.
Oh, we have another person that raised their hand actually. Jesus, do you want to go?
Oh,
Yeah, thank you. So hi, my name's Jesus, and just to answer like the first question, my first interaction with disability was more of visual cues, like someone with a missing limb or a wheelchair. And I think it just fits into the answer of number 3 in the sense that very often people's interaction is less of a conversation and more of visual cues that then spark conversation, if that makes sense. So like very rarely is it something that's brought up or talked about if it's not first experienced firsthand, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, that definitely makes sense. There's this, I see what you're saying. And then another person said in the chat that like in their group, they agreed that their first experience were remembering kids being separated from the rest of the class. And there's barely any talk about disability in the classroom. And yeah, that's a problem that we're hoping to intervene upon and everything, especially as we start going on to the next slide, where we're going to be talking about like the language that we use when talking about disabilities and the community. So I'll hand it off to Jay, who will take over this slide.
All right, so now we're going to discuss access needs, which I mentioned earlier a few times after we watched the video clip. So now we'll clarify what that means. So an access need is something a person needs to communicate, learn, and participate in an activity. And some examples of these are glasses or contact lenses, soft or dim lighting, ramps and elevators, and closed captions. So some of these access needs are considered normal, like glasses, or ramps to a lesser extent because you see them more and more often in buildings. Others aren't as normalized and have to be obtained through various means, such as requesting them through DSP in the case of UCSB. So it's really important to ensure that as many access needs are met as possible so that disabled people can be equally represented in all areas and all activities. So what are some more examples of access needs? You can type in the chat or you can raise your hand. B, go ahead.
I'm just thinking about the transition back to campus with COVID-19 and how students who are immunocompromised will need access to campus, like online learning options and online activities and
I
social.
think you cut out, B.
Hello? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, thumbs up. Okay. I was saying on our return to campus, making sure that students who are immunocompromised or in any way can't come back have access to campus and access to campus activities, I feel like is an access need, especially as we transition back onto campus and exit the pandemic setting Zoom environment. Yeah. Thank you.
That's remote access to learning is so important. And it looks like in the chat, a sign language interpreter is one example of an access need. A note taker and extended time for test taking. Those are also access needs that I myself benefit from. And do we have any more before we move on? Okay, thank you all for sharing your answers for that, and we'll move on to the next slide. Oh, yeah, you're muted.
Well, all right. Well, this is a non-exhaustive list of different access needs, as you can see. And on the list, we have like automatic door buttons, scent-free events, ASL interpretation, like somebody said in the chat, and a whole bunch of other things that normally a lot of people wouldn't really consider to be special or out of the ordinary for people without disabilities or abled people. But a lot of these can benefit disabled people as well. So it's important to think about these and make sure as many as are available as possible. Like for me, virtual office hours, text dictation software, soft lighting, and time extensions are really helpful. Yeah, and each of us has different access needs, so being access conscious in our everyday actions is how we ensure all students have access to equal opportunities. That's like this Zoom meeting having auto transcription enabled, which you should enable if you need it. And yeah, you can enable it for all your meetings if you just go into your Zoom user settings. There's a website that provides info on this. I will link that in a second.
So we're just going through our officers and what our access needs are. So for me personally, I'm a wheelchair user, but also I have an invisible disability as well. So some of the access needs that I benefit from on this list include automatic door buttons, virtual options for classes and office hours, closed captions, and resource distribution areas that are closer on flatter terrain and dispersed locations on campus. Of course, right, keep in mind that some of these accommodations or access needs could assist everybody. This is because it might take not just me, but a lot of people, depending on what their ability level is, taking a lot of mental and physical energy and time to participate in everyday academic, social, and self-care activities.
And then for me personally, some of the access needs that I have are related to sensory support needs. So that's things like wearing sunglasses indoors sometimes, or wearing headphones and earplugs, and having notice ahead of time for events and meetings, and the duration of those meetings can be really helpful. And then at the end of this presentation, we're going to be linking a resource guide from the Pacific Alliance on Disability Self-Advocacy that answers the questions, what are access needs and what happens when those access needs don't work together. We'll move on to the next slide now, where Sophia will be sharing more on disability inclusion.
So the people that spoke in the chat today and out today, in fact, mentioned something that we were going to talk about, and that is right. Let me just make sure. Sorry, it's my internet seems to be okay. So again, it's important to recognize that in today's society, we still hear terms or euphemisms like special needs and special education, like you were mentioning, when talking about the disability community. Although some may disagree, for many in the disability community, this very phrase is offensive and problematic. This is because the label special can make the attention that disabled people receive for their access needs seem optional, extra, like when some people say or do reward us or praise us, and completely separate than the attention that able-bodied people receive for their relatively normal needs. Ultimately, we have to remember that there's no such thing as normal when all of us are different, and it is difficult to initially, right, respond or detect, as someone mentioned earlier, a person's disability just by looking at them. Or, right, someone might use technology that you don't use. For example, as we said earlier, not everyone here wears glasses. Thus, we coexist with the diversity of access needs and adaptive technologies that help us to function in our everyday lives. In this way, the impact of the label special can often be degrading and ostracizing, and can outcast disabled people. To say that someone is special because they have diverse sets of access needs often justifies exclusion and can in fact literally physically mean leaving people out of the room, especially if they use a wheelchair. It disregards the fact that you or anyone you know can acquire a disability at any time. A good example of this would be COVID long haulers, because being a COVID long hauler is now considered a official disability under the ADA. To recap, although we might do things differently when it comes to communicating or moving, different does not mean special. Access needs must not be separated from human needs because everyone has different supports that require them to learn, live, and thrive. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophia, for those beautiful words on disability inclusion. And now we'd like to talk about how disability inclusion specifically shows up in associated students. This year, college and overall education transition processes will be extremely challenging for all members of our campus community, but especially for those with pending or permanent invisible or physical disabilities, when back to normal can often mean back to inaccessibility. This doesn't have to be the case if we can agree that now is the time we intervene by giving support and solidarity to the disability community. As the slide reads, for disabled students, we may experience limitations when there aren't supports in place to accommodate for various access needs. Students should also not have to disclose their medical history for organizations to proactively prioritize accessibility. We also are hoping that we can shift conversations away from really invasive questions such as, what do you struggle with, or what's wrong with you, or what is your disability? Those questions can be quite rude, and towards conversations like, how can I support you, or what support would you benefit from? Engaging in disability inclusion means making that question of how can I support you part of ongoing conversations. Instead of waiting for accommodation requests, you can create an inclusive environment to be at the onset, like as a process of anti-ableism, not just an outcome. So now I would like to give some space for our internal Vice President B to share some words.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, facilitators, for creating space for me and for all the words that you all have said. I want to say hello, everyone who's in their Zoom. I'm going to get loud. Everyone come close, gather near, wake up. If you're not already listening, I want to recenter everyone back. I would like everyone to participate. I did say that in the beginning. So before I speak, I want to say this statement is something that I am very, very firm on, very passionate about, will stick to like glue. And it is, as chair of the Senate and the Honoraria Committee, I will not support processes that penalize students for their disability, health, or well-being. I want to promote an environment that supports those in need, not dox them. For every person in the association, they will have the right to allowing the right to have their accommodations met. And I implore this for every BCU chair in the audience, appointed member, that you take this as something to consider as well when you are in your own respective honoraria committee or honoraria type situation, or you're penalizing people for honoraria. Maybe you think maybe why they haven't completed something that they needed to complete. And so the rest I'll save for the end. But yeah, I just wanted to state that to you all, is that something that I will not be doing. And so you could have trust and be assured that that will never happen. So I think it was Marvia or Jay or Sophia who was talking about COVID long haul symptoms. That is a real issue. It affects you. And I know a few people who are very affected whose life isn't the same. They can't breathe, they can't walk, and now they use a lot of the things that normally people with asthma use, a lot of like the medical equipment, which is something that they weren't anticipating. And so going back into the UCSB environment, knowing that some students or faculty or staff might be suffering from that, which is just one small example of what people might be, dealing with from day to day. You cannot be penalized for that under my watch. So yeah, that's all I wanted to say. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Bea. That was really inspiring for sharing your thoughts. That was great. And we would also like to take a quick moment to promote our website and its important terms page. And that's linked on the slide and presented here. It can be found by visiting the code website's terms to know page, which can be found under the education tab. So on this page, you can find more educational resources on ableism, access needs, identity first and person first language, neurodiversity, the social model of disability, the acronym SDQD BIPOC, and Universal Design for Learning, or UDL. So now let's move on to part 2 of our presentation.
Thank you. So part 2 is going to be talking about what disability justice is, because a lot of the principles that activists and artists made with disability justice is what guides the work that Code is hoping to do. So just like as a very broad definition of what disability justice is, it's a framework that calls attention to the ways that ableism is linked to multiple other systems of oppression. There's more history of this that can be found on our website. And to make sure we have time for everything, I'll be moving on to the next slide where we have this video, and I'll play this now.
Disability is a normal, positive part of human diversity.
There are 1 billion individuals in this world with disabilities.
There's a lot of kinds of different disabilities.
Disabled people have other important identities.
We want to have a say in everything that affects us.
We are people with disabilities building power and inclusive social justice movements.
You can't have racial justice or economic justice or gender justice without disability justice. Just like you can't have disability justice without having racial, economic, and gender justice. To actually achieve any of those things requires achieving all of those things.
When we evolve our institutions to be fully inclusive, we can build a world where all are free.
True inclusion is revolutionary.
Okay, so now that we've watched the video, I just wanted to reiterate and further reinforce what the scholars and activists in the video said and related to our campus, but also our role in higher education as well. And that is that one cannot plan affairs or have full student representation without considering and responding to the disabled student experience. When we say nothing about us without us, we mean that we do have a lot to say and should be welcomed at the table, especially when it comes to improving resources and programs available to marginalized, but all students, regardless of their ability. One cannot construct long-term projects or proceed with ideas that promote diversity, equity, and inclusion without responding and accounting for people with disabilities' perspectives, experiences, and difficulties. Unfortunately, these perspectives are often neglected directly or indirectly in an ableist society. It is not just about putting me physically in an activity, but it means giving space to allow me and fellow disabled people to meaningfully contribute to the conversation in order to perpetuate inclusive and proactive change while supporting us in the process. In short, this means actively seeking out our perspectives. When we say disability demands justice, we ask you to think about how every social issue that affects marginalized people and humanity affects 15% of that community to a more intense extent. Therefore, we are not a problem to fix, but rather we simply need accommodations to navigate around in this world. Again, like Marvia was saying, code aspires to foster and maintain an intersectional and holistic approach to universal access, disability justice, awareness, and appreciation. We aim to form coalitions and grow cross-campus solidarity with other entities, regardless if they're undergraduates, graduate students, because they all work to support marginalized students.
It's
Thank you
12
very much.
o'clock.
Thank you. And it's really important that last, what she said with, we're not a problem to fix, but rather we simply need accommodations to navigate the world around us. We hope you keep that in mind when considering what your organization does. And we'll also talk more about the Disability Justice Framework. Jay?
All right, so furthermore, the video we watched in the previous slide also shows, in addition to this slide, that we are directly impacted and provide valuable insight to all institutions, right? Because the disability community is diverse and exists across all identities and backgrounds. Ableism affects all communities and it is at the core of our society. All members of the disability community, but especially disabled people of color, are marginalized and are vulnerable to ableist discrimination, economic instability, prejudice, and violence. To dismantle systems of oppression and difference, such as racism or sexism, disabled people's voices must be included in the conversation. The disability community exists across every community, and disabled people may have to deal with additional discrimination based on sexual orientation, gender, race, economic status, etc. And so disability adds another dimension to these marginalized groups' experiences and shapes the interactions that disabled people may have with multiple systems of oppression. Regardless of the label that we examine in an individual's identity, some portion of that population identifies themselves as disabled. So then we can move on to another discussion.
So thank you, Sophia and Jay, for those words of knowledge. And as associated students, we know that many of you are involved in other movements for social change. So in this large group discussion section, we would like to highlight the ways that disability justice intersects with other social resistance movements. So please take a moment to consider the question on the screen. How can we use a disability justice framework to analyze different social issues and current events? I'll give you all a moment to think about your answers to that question. And in this time, please consider the ways you have seen ableism affect people who identify with other marginalized communities. I'll give it a moment and I'll ask that you either use the chat or the raise hand feature to share your answers.
When we say current events, we mean the news and what's been going on recently, either in California or overall.
Okay, so now that we've all had a moment to think about this question, if you could please share your answers in the chat or use the raise hand feature, we would like to start discussing. Okay, Tiane and Celine, you both have things, so you could go first.
Hi, my name's Tiana. And actually one of my groups, Students for Reproductive Justice, we were over the summer during the Britney Spears Free Britney case. We were talking about that through both the lens of reproductive justice, since that's what our group centers on, but also disability justice, in the terms of like, there's so much overcross between the two, with how people with disabilities are either sterilized or like not allowed, or they're like prevention of having children and all that. And reproductive justice tenets are the right to have children, but also with this case, conservatorship is something that affects so many people. And Brittany is just sort of this sort of spotlight case in terms of current events. And it just allowed us to sort of have this greater discussion and try to work that into our work. And also like people we talk about work that in as well. So yeah.
Thank you, Tiana. Celine, you had your hand up next.
Yeah, this is kind of an inference. So go ahead and tell me if this is, off base or whatever. But I would have to guess that, the economic crisis and like increased houselessness as a result of COVID would have a stronger effect on, or a more widespread impact on people with disabilities, particularly people from like QT POC communities, because like people of color, particularly people from Black communities and Chicano communities, have experienced like the highest rates of joblessness as a result of the crisis? Question mark?
No, yeah, I definitely see how what you're saying, like Tiana was saying, with reproductive justice as being disability justice, in the same sense when we think about houselessness and the economic crisis, those are also disability issues. Lizzie shared in the chat that when thinking about the future we want to build in terms of a climate resilient future, imagining ways that we build back better in a way that is inclusive and centering the disabled community is definitely a really important perspective. I know of people on Twitter, at least like talking about what it means to build a climate resilient future and how we need to make sure that people with like temperature regulation issues with their bodies are considered when we think about like how New York had to like shut down like their power and everything, the way that could affect people who need ventilators or who need air conditioning is really important to consider. And yeah, Landry, you wanted to share more?
Yeah, this is kind of going off of what Lizzie had mentioned in the chat, but when we think about a future that centers environmental and disability justice, I think it's really important, like we were discussing earlier, to think about how disabilities can arise at any time. So for using the example of COVID long haul symptoms and other issues of immunocompromised health for other folks, that we have to consider how that will come into play as, access to clean air and, just good air quality, good water quality, and how that's already going to be putting folks with immunocompromised folks at a higher disadvantage.
Thank you. I'm glad that we're getting some really good answers here. And I think this would be a good moment to go to our breakout room so that we can all have a chance to discuss this in more detail. When we're thinking about the ways that disability justice can be used to analyze different social issues or current events, we're really discussing what universal design or what inclusivity means and anti-ableism means in terms of environmental justice or reproductive justice or all the things that we were talking about. So on the screen, we have the question, what would a world with universal access look like? I'm gonna send us all into breakout rooms so we can discuss this further. And yeah, I'll also be putting the question in the chat.
Okay, I hope you all had some interesting discussions. We do have one more discussion question, but it's not going to be in the breakout rooms. It is going to be one of the large group discussions, so you can put your answers in the chat, or you can raise your hand. So Marvia, next slide maybe.
Or actually, I think we still have some time to take at least 5 more minutes or
Okay.
just sometimes so people could share what they talked about in their breakout rooms.
All right.
And then after that, we can move on to the next slide. If anyone wants to share what they talked about, we could have some hand raise or share in the chat. Oh, I
Okay,
don't know if I
Monica.
was muted.
Yeah, hi everybody. So something I mentioned in my group was that like how the world would look like if it had like universal access. I mentioned how there wouldn't be any assumptions of like the capability of people and what they could produce and how much of that they'd be able to produce. So I mentioned how like deadlines would look different, how the production of what somebody's capable of would look different, you know, academia would look different, right? So I feel like any place like workspaces would be different and they would be more focused on the well-being of people rather than what they can produce and how fast they could produce it or to what capability they could produce that. It would be more focused on you know, like healthcare. It would be more focused on like people's like mental well-beings and time that they can put into being productive and so on and so forth.
Thank you. I definitely feel that what you said really drives that point home, that disability justice definitely demands that we transform a lot of what the world currently looks like. Did that resonate with things that other people shared in their breakout rooms? Hadley said in the chat. To stop trying to fix one's disability and to provide many different and various supports for anyone who needs it.
I think one of the conversation I was having was about how it's very difficult to have conversation about somebody's disability without fearing, that their confidentiality is an issue. And so this is why code has taken more of a collective action approach. And we encourage you to think about that a little bit more, and we are here to help you with that fear.
Jesus, go ahead.
Hi. So, like Monica, I also went like quite big in the sense of like universal healthcare and stuff. But then Sophia also asked about like on a smaller scale about our campus. And I before like the breakout room ended, I couldn't say it, but so just the idea that like in our really big lecture halls, there's not a lot of space in between seats, and at our school there actually does tend to be quite a bit of accidents, whether it be on skateboards or bikes, and or just because sometimes people get quite rowdy over the weekend. Some people end up breaking limbs, and it's like witnessing people on crutches try to get into these seats is just really difficult. And like, yeah, you can just find one on the end or whatever, but I think it just like one small thing would just be adding a little bit more space in between seats. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So designing-
that's exactly what I mean in terms of infrastructure, right? That's what we are trying to draw people's attention to, and definitely like spacing out seats. I know with COVID and protocols, that's a big concern. So thank you for bringing that up.
All right, B, go ahead.
I was in the group with Monica, which was great, and she. But I wanted to say that I was saying that envisioning AS to be more accessible, because that's kind of like our little world that we have to change, and making sure events and spaces are just completely accessible and only happen in accessible spaces. And as an association with the BCUs and appointed members, visualizing that space and actively working to make our little world more accessible. So I kind of spoke upon that after Monica mentioned productivity. And then when I was in the group with she said that having not separating people or being exclusive in any space. So I thought that was important to share. So thank you.
Sure, and that's what universal design is all about, right? It's providing supports for whoever needs them, no matter what kind of situation we're in, whether it's a small group or an extremely large group. Um, it's transitioning our world toward one that's built on compassion rather than on greed and exclusion. So that's, I think, the core of disability justice is really centering compassion and support for all people rather than prioritizing yourself over everybody else. Yeah, and Celine said in the chat, approaching accommodation for different abilities as a strength and a value to productivity and creativity rather than a hindrance. That's a really important perspective, yeah. All right, any more comments?
I just really want to mention, like, this year, as we said, is going to be very difficult, right? The transition process. And so later on, what we're going to do is to encourage you, right, to start acting, but really thinking about just how little changes, very simple changes to, your events, like Bea was saying, where the event is, how close it is, etc. Really does uphold universal access vision, right? Thank you.
All right, and then, oh, and we got a message in the chat saying, I keep forgetting that transfers, freshmen and sophomores will be new to campus, so the first couple weeks will be busy and dangerous in biking lanes, walkways, and skating lanes, especially for those who have difficulty getting from place to place. Yeah, and that's something really important that we all should keep in mind during our first couple of weeks to make sure we're not behaving dangerously, making sure we're centering safety when we're traveling between classes, to make the environment both as safe for abled people and for disabled people as possible. So now we'll move into our final discussion question, which is just going to be a large group discussion, no breakout rooms. How has your perspective on disability changed after this workshop? So again, you can put your answers in the chat or you can raise your hand. We just like to know, like, how has your opinion changed? Right, and Marvia said in the chat, being patient and considerate when people might be late to meetings, given those difficulties, that's really important.
Bea, I see your hand is still raised. I don't know if that's from before, but sorry. And yeah, like if there's anyone who has answers for this question and would like to volunteer, Bea.
Also, you can reach out to us later if you can't think of an answer right off the spot, but yeah.
I would say that how my perspective, someone put amazing workshop, Lizzie, I agree as well. I would say that my perspective has changed on how I want to use my time and my power within the association to help address matters of accessibility, and working with Senate to make sure that these matters are addressed, and in collaboration with everyone here, which is like BCU appointed members. But I feel like we could really change the space to meet more needs and more people. And then Jay, I think you just said bike lane safety. Like I've gone in 3 bike crashes and like it's been really bad for me. And so like just thinking of newcomers who have never gone on campus, just getting a bike and just realizing you have to take that to campus is something that should be addressed. Or like what Jesus said, like those are all such cool things that we could implement because we have the power to do it. So thank you all. So that's the perspective I walk away with, is some things I need to address. So thank you.
Just so we have enough time to cover everything, this is the last slide, and we actually did prepare an exit handout so that you can access these slides and have an overview of the most important takeaways we'd like you to have. And there's just a short video clip that we'd like to close this workshop with.
Imagine. What choices can we make to truly accelerate full inclusion? What choices can we make to collectively dismantle ableism?
What choices can we make to fuel our march towards social justice?
There is so much.
You can open up the conversation,
ask questions,
and listen and learn
to move past our collective fear toward action.
You can
create a safe space for disability identity,
including your own.
You can ensure that people with disabilities are involved in decision-making and agenda setting.
You can
center the priorities of disabled people in your advocacy.
And commit both time and budget to making all your organization's activities accessible
and inclusive.
You will.
So that was the video, but and then Sophia would like to just recap with some reflection questions.
So, and thank you for everybody saying, thanks for this workshop. Thank you to Holly and Bee for letting us host this workshop. But again, circling it back to me, after watching that video, finally to recap, here are a few reflection questions. So the first one is, how can you work to end ableism, either in the immediate present, with this year coming up, or in the future? 2, how might disability justice apply or resonate in your life, which a lot of people shared with me, but also in general. So thank you very much. And then 3, what are some ways your campus entity could collaborate with code in the future? And again, thank you for your attention and active participation.
And before we end the meeting, there is
imagine.
What choices?
There, we did include the link to the slides because it has these really important educational resources on disability justice, and also includes links to the videos that we shared. And I think Bea also wanted to close the presentation with some words.
Hi, everyone, again. I did want to close with some words. I wanted to share with you all a resolution that I wrote when I was a senator, titled For Identification Purposes Only, along with Senator Starr, who was also a former senator, a part of the 71st Senate. And the goal was to support and uplift all disabled students and their needs at that time, which was winter 2020, I believe was the quarter. Yeah. And so in this resolution, we talked about kind of some of the emphasized challenges that students are suffering as we go into COVID. And a resolution, if you all are not familiar, just lasts for that academic year. So it's just for 2020 to 2021, not 2021 to 2022. But the goal of this was to support disabled students in higher education, as well as in the sphere of student life. But student life wasn't really occurring because no one was on campus. But I was sorry about that. I think that as an organization, if all the BCUs come together and think about ways that they can increase accessibility in conjunction with their Senate liaison, we can have more policies in place to protect and give voice and uplift disabled students. And so if you all are interested, please contact my office, work with code, and we could get in touch. So thank you. I'll put my email in the chat as well.
If anyone has any questions, you can ask us now, or we, like Marvia, she gave the flyer on that slide, but that's our outreach flyer for this coming year. And hopefully, again, as Bea said, you can reach out to us and help us get through this difficult year. Thank you.